the weight of empire measured in pounds of gold wrapped around broken wrists. Picture yourself in the year 274 CE, pressed shoulder to shoulder against ancient Roman stonework, one body among countless thousands lining these narrow streets. Movement is impossible. Breathing takes effort. Your singular purpose on this sweltering afternoon bear witness. At the procession's heart, a figure stumbles forward on unsteady legs. Her forearms bear wounds that refuse to heal, not rope burns, but something far more deliberate. 40 pounds of solid golden shackles encircle her limbs, throat, and ankles with such crushing mass that a pair of legionaries walk flanking her position, supporting the chain's weight to prevent her face from meeting cobblestone. That precious metal belonged to her treasury mere months earlier. It financed her military campaigns, erected her temples, established her as the most formidable female ruler stretching from Egyptian borders to Anatolian provinces. Now it serves as her torturer. Zenobia of Palmyra, the Eastern sovereign who embarrassed 3 consecutive Roman emperors and commanded 70,000 battle-hardened warriors, now shuffles through imperial streets like livestock on exhibition. The mob erupts, overripe produce detonates against her torso. Saliva strikes her cheekbone and she cannot raise her hands to wipe it away because her own plundered wealth pins them immobile. A young boy extends his finger, laughing. His mother hoists him higher for improved visibility. But here's the invisible reality no street observer can detect inside Zenobia's consciousness. A single plea cycles with every agonizing step forward. A desperate invocation she's been murmuring since first light broke. Not the supplication you'd anticipate. Not deliver me from this. Not grant me fortitude. Just 3 syllables on endless repeat. Let it be the villa. Because she understands the binary fate awaiting at this road's terminus. One threshold opens onto a guarded residence where she'll exist indefinitely as Rome's breathing trophy. The other descends into a lightless cavity carved beneath Capitoline Hill, where the empire concludes its adversaries in absolute darkness, ensuring nothing remains for memory or history. 4 kilometers of uncertainty about which door bears her name, 4 kilometers of grinning Romans determining whether she draws another breath, 4 kilometers of prayers to deities who have never once responded. This represents what Rome systematically inflicted upon captured queens, not exclusively Zenobia, not a singular occurrence. This was methodology refined across 7 centuries, engineered to shatter the ancient world's most powerful women. And Zenobia? She counted among the fortunate ones. The others endured destinies that rendered execution a mercy by comparison. If this narrative grips your attention, press that like button. It requires 1 second and amplifies our ability to resurrect voices the past tried to silence. But before comprehending what befell the queens who weren't blessed with fortune, you must first understand what a Roman triumph actually entailed. Erase every cinematic image you've absorbed. The authentic experience was infinitely worse. When a Roman commander secured a decisive military victory, the Senate could bestow upon him a triumph, the supreme recognition in Roman civilization. A colossal parade penetrating the city's heart, commemorating his conquest. But this transcended mere parade. This was psychological warfare costumed as civic celebration. The procession initiated at Campus Martius beyond the city barriers. It serpentined through urban passages for nearly 4 kilometers, culminating at Jupiter's temple crowning Capitoline Hill. The entire metropolis ceased functioning. Over 1 million souls packed to the route. Commercial establishments shuttered. Legal proceedings suspended. Even enslaved individuals received the day's reprieve so they could observe other enslaved people being paraded in restraints. Here's the procession's architecture, and I need you to envision yourself as a captured queen observing this approach. First, you detect the acoustics, brass horns, and percussion reverberating off stone architecture. The sound ricochets through passages for nearly an hour before visual confirmation arrives. Then emerge the wagons, cart after cart, laden with treasure pillaged from your kingdom, gold currency your forebears minted, silver serving plates your grandmother dined upon, sacred artifacts from sanctuaries your people constructed across generations. The crowd roars at each wagon's passage. They're calculating how dramatically their tax burden will decrease now that Rome possesses your wealth. Then arrive the painting's massive timber panels hoisted by slaves displaying images of your cities engulfed in flames, your soldiers perishing, your palace being ransacked. Has effects, crowd roaring. Roman artists traveled embedded with legions specifically to capture these scenes. The throng gestures at the paintings and erupts in laughter. They recognize your city. They celebrate when they witness it consumed by fire. Then come the creature's exotic fauna from your homeland, lions confined in cages, elephants bound in chains, unusual birds imprisoned in gilded enclosures. Evidence that Rome has subjugated not merely your population, but your very geography. And then silence descends. The crowd falls mute. The drumbeat decelerates because now approach the prisoners, common infantry first. Hundreds of them linked together, shuffling forward with downcast eyes. They comprehend they're walking towards slave auctions. Their existence as free men has terminated, but the crowd scarcely acknowledges them. They're anticipating you. The captured rulers walk at the prisoner column's vanguard, still adorned in royal garments, still decorated with crowns and ornaments. This is calculated. A defeated peasant signifies nothing, but a queen still draped in silk and gold, still identifiable as the ruler who defied Rome, now shuffling in shackles, wounded, exhausted, humiliated. That's the message that reverberates across the ancient world. No crown shields you. No army preserves you. No throne exists beyond our grasp. And here's what Hollywood never reveals: the uncertainty. Some captured rulers survived the triumph. They received exile, comfortable confinement, even integration into Roman society. Others faced execution the instant the parade concluded, dragged into an underground prison called the Tullianum, while celebration continued overhead, never witnessed again, their names scraped from history. You never knew which fate awaited until you reached that 4-kilometer walk's conclusion. That uncertainty constituted part of the torture. For captured queens, survival itself became the cruelest sentence. For female rulers, the calculation grew even more complex. A deceased queen became a name erased, a trophy forgotten within a week. But a living queen, broken, humiliated, visible for years as a reminder of Roman supremacy, that held more value than any execution, unless she proved too dangerous to preserve breathing. The decision rested entirely with the emperor, and you wouldn't learn his choice until a guard either handed you villa keys or carried out the sentence. In 60 CE, on a frigid island at the known world's periphery, a queen discovered precisely how worthless her crown was to Rome. Her name was Boudica, and her story ranks among Roman history's most brutal chapters. She reigned as queen of the Iceni, a Celtic tribe occupying what is now eastern England. Her husband, King Prasutagus, had invested his entire reign attempting to maintain peace with Rome. He remitted their taxes. He observed their statutes. He even bequeathed half his kingdom to Emperor Nero in his testament to desperate maneuver to protect his family after death. The other half he left to his 2 daughters. It was a reasonable strategy, a compromise that should have satisfied all parties. Rome disregarded it entirely. Within days of Prasutagus' death, imperial officials materialized with soldiers. They announced that the entire kingdom now belonged to Rome. The will meant nothing. The alliance meant nothing. Decades of loyalty meant nothing. They commenced seizing everything. Iceni nobles were extracted from their residences in the middle of the night. Estates that had belonged to families for generations were confiscated before dawn. Relatives of the deceased king were shackled and marched into bondage while their children observed. Boudica protested. She was the queen. Her husband had been a Roman ally. There were treaties, there were laws. She demanded to speak with the procurator, a man named Catullus Decianus. He agreed to meet with her. What transpired next was documented by the Roman historian Tacitus, whose father-in-law served in Britain during this period. Tacitus doesn't conceal what happened. He doesn't soften it. He describes it with the kind of direct horror that tells you even Romans were disturbed by what their officials perpetrated. Boudica was seized by soldiers before her own people. They humiliated her in the public square. The queen, who had ruled beside her husband for decades, degraded before her subjects. They bound her to a post and they flogged her. A Roman flogging wasn't comparable to being struck with a belt. They employed a flagrum, a whip with multiple leather strips embedded with metal spheres and fragments of sheep bone. Each strike tore flesh from muscle. Each blow left wounds that would scar for life. Victims often died from flogging alone. Boudica survived. But the flogging wasn't the worst component. Her daughters were brought forward. Tacitus doesn't provide their ages. He doesn't name them. He simply states they were unmarried. The soldiers seized them by the arms. They took them away toward the soldiers' quarters. And Boudica, still bound to the post, still bleeding from the flogging, understood in that moment what was about to occur. She screamed, not words, just sound, the raw animal scream of a mother watching her children being taken. She pulled against the ropes until her wrists bled, attempted to tear herself free, begged in a language the Romans didn't understand and wouldn't have cared about if they did. The soldiers laughed. Tacitus says they were handed over to the soldiers. He doesn't describe what happened next. He didn't need to. Every Roman reading his account understood exactly what that phrase meant. What was done to them was done deliberately, not in private, not in secret, before the Iceni people. Before their mother, still bleeding from the flogging, still bound to the post, made to watch helplessly from where she stood, because closing her eyes meant abandoning them. This was the message. This was what happened to anyone who questioned Rome. Your queen is nothing. Your princesses are nothing. Your entire tribe is nothing. Caius Decianus expected the Iceni to submit after this display. He expected them to be too terrified, too broken to resist. He was catastrophically wrong. Within weeks, Boudica raised an army. Not just the Iceni. Word of what happened to the royal family spread across Britain like wildfire. Tribes who had tolerated Roman rule for decades suddenly saw their own daughters in those princesses, their own wives in that flogged queen. They came by the thousands, then the tens of thousands. Boudica led them first to Camulodunum, the Roman capital of Britain. The city had no walls. The veterans who lived there had grown soft and complacent, convinced their conquered subjects would never dare to rise. The Iceni burned it to the ground. They left no one untouched: men, women, children, slaves, anyone with a connection to Rome. They didn't take prisoners. They didn't ask for surrender. This wasn't conquest, this was revenge. Londinium was next, the largest trading city in Britain. The Romans tried to evacuate, but thousands were left behind. Boudica's armies showed no mercy. Archaeologists have found a layer of burned debris across London dating to exactly this period, a red line of destruction that marks how completely the city was razed. Tacitus claims the final death toll was 70,000 Romans and Roman allies. Other sources put it even higher. And through it all, Boudica led from the front, riding a chariot, her daughters beside her, the same daughters who had been violated in the public square, now watching Roman cities burn. Tacitus preserved a speech he attributed to her before the final battle. Standing before her army, she declared that she came not as a queen fighting for her kingdom. She came as a mother, avenging what had been done to her daughters. The final battle came at a location that's never been identified. Roman discipline and tactical positioning overcame Boudica's larger but disorganized force. The rebellion was crushed. Boudica poisoned herself rather than be captured. She knew what Rome did to captured queens. She had already experienced a taste of it. Her daughters disappeared from history after the initial assault. Their names were never recorded, their fates unknown. Maybe they died in battle. Maybe they took poison beside their mother. Maybe they were captured and suffered the very fate Boudica had fought to avenge. We'll never know. Rome made sure of that. 40 years before Boudica painted Britain red with Roman blood, another queen learned that sometimes survival is its own form of torture. Her name was Thusnelda, and her story might be the cruelest of all, not because of what was done to her body, but because of what was done to her bloodline. She was the wife of Arminius, a Germanic chieftain who handed Rome its most humiliating military defeat in history. You might not know his name, but you know what he did. In 9 CE, Arminius ambushed 3 entire Roman legions in the Teutoburg forest. 15,000 soldiers walked into that forest. Almost none walked out. 3 days of slaughter in the rain and mud. Legion eagles, the sacred standards that represented Rome itself, captured by barbarians. The commander Varus took his own life rather than be taken alive. When news reached Emperor Augustus, the most powerful man in the world, reportedly wandered his palace for months afterward, banging his head against the walls, screaming into the darkness, "Varus, give me back my legions." Rome never forgot that defeat. They never forgave it, and when they couldn't capture Arminius himself, they went after everyone he loved. Thusnelda was betrayed by her own father. His name was Segestes, a Germanic chief who had opposed his daughter's marriage to Arminius from the beginning. He had always supported Rome, always believed cooperation was better than resistance. When Roman forces returned to Germania seeking revenge, Segestes saw an opportunity to prove his loyalty. He kidnapped his own pregnant daughter and handed her over to the legions. Let that sink in. Her own father. While she was carrying his grandchild, He traded his daughter and his unborn grandchild for Roman favor, for political advantage, for a pat on the head from the empire that wanted to destroy everything his people had built. The Romans were delighted. They couldn't have Arminius, but they had the next best thing, his wife and his unborn heir. They kept Thusnelda imprisoned but alive. They let her give birth in captivity, a son named Thumelichus, the heir to Arminius, the prince of the Cherusei, the grandson of Rome's greatest military humiliation. They waited until 17 CE, when the general Germanicus finally had enough victories in Germania to claim a triumph. And that's when they paraded Thusnelda through Rome. Imagine this scene, a Germanic queen, proud wife of the man who made Augustus weep, walking in chains through streets filled with Romans who had lost fathers, brothers, and sons in that forest. Her infant son in her arms. The crowd didn't just jeer, they howled for blood. They screamed for the baby to be killed right there in the street. Mothers pointed at the child and told their own children, "That's the spawn of the monster who killed your uncle, your father, your grandfather." A child in the crowd threw a stone. It struck Thusnelda's shoulder. Then another stone. Then another. Roman soldiers had to form a barrier around her, not to protect her, but to make sure she survived long enough to complete the procession. The Roman writer Strabo described Thusnelda's face during the triumph. He expected her to weep, to beg, to collapse like so many prisoners before her. She didn't. She walked with her eyes fixed forward. Her face showed nothing. No fear, no tears, no satisfaction given to the mob that wanted to see her broken. But here's what Strabo couldn't see inside. Thusnelda was making a promise. Not to the gods. Not to her husband fighting somewhere in the forests of Germania. To the infant boy pressed against her chest. She whispered it so quietly that no one heard, in the Germanic tongue that Romans couldn't understand. "They will not break you. Whatever they do, wherever they take you, you are the son of Arminius. You carry his blood. And one day, she never finished the promise. Because she already knew she couldn't keep it. She held her son against her chest and walked 4 kilometers through pure hatred. But her defiance couldn't protect him. Thumelichus was raised as a Roman slave, the heir to Germania's greatest hero. The prince who should have led his people against Rome was instead trained as a gladiator. Think about what that means. Romans went to the arena to watch prisoners fight for entertainment. They ate figs and drank wine while men struggled on the sand. They cheered when combat ended, when a body fell, when victory was declared. And somewhere in that arena, fighting for their amusement, was the son of the man who had defeated 3 legions. The emperors knew exactly who he was. Every time they watched him fight, they were watching the son of their greatest enemy struggle to survive. Every wound he took was revenge for Teutoburg. Every time he prevailed, he was proving that Rome had broken the bloodline of Arminius. Most Romans in the crowd had no idea. They just saw another barbarian with a sword trying to survive another day. But that was the point. The prince of the Cherusei reduced to anonymous entertainment, his royal blood meaning nothing. His father's legacy erased with every fight. Did Thumelichus know who he was? Did anyone ever tell him that his father was a hero? That his mother had been a queen? That he was supposed to lead armies, not die for applause? Or did he grow up believing he was nothing? Just another slave. Just another body for the arena. We'll never know, because Rome made sure no one recorded his story. The sources say he died at Ravenna, lost in the arena, the last of Arminius's bloodline, his life ending on the sand while Romans cheered and ate their lunch. Nobody recorded his final opponent. Nobody remembered his last words. He was just another fallen gladiator. Another body removed while the crowd waited for the next fight. And that was exactly what Rome wanted. Thusnelda herself vanishes from history after the triumph. No record of her death, no mention of her fate. She probably spent her remaining years as a household slave somewhere in Italy, scrubbing floors, serving food, following orders from people who weren't fit to carry her sandals when she was queen. Did she ever learn what happened to her son? Did she hear rumors from other slaves? Did she die hoping he was still alive somewhere, still fighting? Or did she die knowing that the promise she whispered during the triumph, the promise that they wouldn't break him, had been broken before he could even remember her face? The woman who had stood beside the greatest Germanic hero of all time, reduced to property, her husband dead, her son lost in the arena, her father living comfortably as a Roman collaborator, rewarded for his betrayal. That was Roman mercy, not death, not even public torture. just a slow, grinding erasure of everything you ever were. Now you understand what Zenobia was thinking during those 4 kilometers. She knew about Boudica. Every queen in the ancient world knew about Boudica. The story was passed down as a warning. This is what happens when Rome decides to make an example. She knew about Thusnelda, about the sun raised as a gladiator, about the slow destruction of an entire bloodline. So when Zenobia felt those golden chains crushing her wrists, she wasn't just experiencing physical pain. She was calculating, would Aurelian execute her? Would he hand her over to his soldiers like Boudica? Would he keep her alive as a trophy, watching her children be absorbed into the empire that destroyed her? 4 kilometers of those thoughts, 1 million Romans screaming for her blood. And at the end, she got the door that didn't lead to the execution chamber. Emperor Aurelian made a calculation of his own. Zenobia was too famous to simply execute. For 5 years, she had ruled an empire that stretched across the Roman East. She had minted coins with her face, declared herself Queen of Egypt, styled herself as the new Cleopatra. Killing her would make her a martyr, a symbol of resistance, a name that rebels would invoke for centuries. But keeping her alive visible, dependent on Rome for everything that told a better story. Look at Zenobia. Look at the Queen of the East. She challenged us, and now she lives at our pleasure, eating our food, following our laws, grateful to be alive. Aurelian gave her a villa in Tibol, about 30 kilometers from Rome, a comfortable prison, a gilded cage. The Historia Augusta tells us what happened next. Zenobia married a Roman senator. The warrior queen who had humiliated 3 emperors became a Roman housewife. She attended dinner parties where guests whispered about her past. She walked through markets where people pointed and stared. She raised daughters who would never know the empire their mother had built. Daughters who learned Latin instead of Aramaic, who worshipped Roman gods instead of the gods of Palmyra. Her daughters married into noble families. They raised children who would grow up thinking of themselves as Roman. Within 3 generations, the bloodline of the Queen of the East had been completely absorbed. No one would remember they carried the blood of a woman who once controlled more territory than most Roman emperors. That was the genius of Rome. They didn't just defeat their enemies. They erased them, absorbed them, turned conquered bloodlines into Roman citizens who celebrated the empire that destroyed their ancestors. Boudica chose death rather than live as Rome's trophy. A rebellion killed 70,000 Romans, but it ultimately failed, and her daughters vanished from history. Thusnelda watched her son become a gladiator, watched him die for Roman entertainment, spent her remaining years as a slave. Zenobia survived. She had comfort. She had status. But every day for the rest of her life, she woke up knowing she existed because Rome allowed her to exist. Every meal she ate, every bed she slept in, every conversation she had, all of it, was a gift from the empire that destroyed everything she built. Was that mercy? Or was that the most sophisticated torture of all? The Mamertine prison still stands in Rome today. You can visit it, take photographs, post them online. Tourists stand in the same chamber where Rome ended its enemies in the dark while celebrations echoed above. The streets where Zenobia walked in golden chains are now shopping districts. People drink espresso in the same forum where crowds once cheered for captured queens to be destroyed. We've sanitized this history, turned suffering into scenery just like the Romans did. Zenobia survived those chains. She lived out her days in a Roman villa, comfortable, watched, dependent. But her servant said she woke shaking from nightmares, that her eyes sometimes drifted mid-conversation, lost in memories she never spoke aloud, that she prayed alone in a language Rome could never erase. She never returned to Palmyra, never saw her throne again. When she died, she was buried in Roman soil under a Roman name. The Queen of the East, erased almost completely, but not entirely. Boudica's story survived. The Sounders' story survived. Rome wanted them forgotten. 2,000 years later, someone is still telling their story. They were meant to be silenced. But silence is not erasure, and forgotten is not gone. If this reached you, hit that like button and subscribe to the History and Fact. We dig into the chapter's history, trying to erase the voices that were meant to stay silent forever. Because the past isn't dead. It's waiting in the dark, waiting for someone to listen.